Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Vintage Racers Roundtable. My name is Ken Minot. I'm the president of the Maine Vintage Race Car Association, and it's a pleasure to have you guys here with us once again, as this is a production of MVRCA and Lincoln County TV. We want to thank Larry Seidlinger and his group here for hosting us once again. It's another installment in a series of programs we do where we gather together some of the legends of Maine auto racing, share some stories, and take a glance in the rearview mirror of their legendary careers. However, today we're changing things up just a little bit. Typically, we'll have some drivers or crew chiefs, car builders that have had a hand in Maine racing history. Today, we're going to talk to some people who have helped us preserve that history. Obviously, our involvement here in the Maine Vintage Race Car Association, but we couldn't do it without the great help of people like these three folks sitting at the table with us today. So we want to welcome across the table Steve Pellerin, who's an original member of the Maine Vintage Race Car Association. Besides Steve, we have Paige Woods, who is the creator of Maine's Lost Speedways, and we have Mr. Charlie Sheehan. So welcome all to you guys here today. And right here beside me, as always, my partner in crime, my co-host Pete Silva. Pete's a member of the Maine Motorsports Hall of Fame class of 2016 and the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame class of 2018. So, Pete, kind of a different show for us today.
Yeah, I think this is cool. I can't wait. I know a little bit about these three, but I don't know everything, and I'm going to know more in another hour. And what impresses me about these, and I want to, three, before we get going, and I want to say it, is they don't just talk the talk, they've walked the walk. All three of them have competed. Two of them have driven. One of them's been a car owner and a crew member for some pretty high-end teams. So all three of them have been to victory lane, and I think that gives them all kinds of credibility moving forward to do what they do now to preserve our history. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got to obviously have a lot of stories to share today. So without further ado, we'll jump right into it. And Steve, I'm going to jump across the table to you. Of course, we're going to start with you, my friend.
We always start with the elder statesman.
Yeah, give us a little background. Where you're from, your family, what you do for work, and how you got involved in this sport.
I live in Gorham currently with my wife, and I'm retired firefighter from Portland Fire Department. I put in 30 years there, and I had 10 years with the Town of Brunswick Fire Department before that. Wow. My son graduated from UNE a couple of years ago, and he's in Massachusetts. He's a doctor of physical therapy, and doesn't share the interest in racing that my wife and I have. My wife and I, we both sort of grew up at the track, and her dad had a race car. How I got interested in it was my dad was working for the paper mill in Westbrook at the time, and I'd go see him at the power station where he worked on weekends. And 10-year-old kids could be a PIA and sometimes when you're bored, nothing to do. And my dad got me one day and he says, go up there to that gas station, he says, and go look at that race car up there. And that was it. I was hooked forever. And it was one of Jimmy McClure's first winning C-Class cars in 1968. And I went up there and they had a wreck one and they had the one that they were working on, and there was a guy there sign painting, getting it ready for that night. And I was just mesmerized, and my dad paid the price because all the way home, all I was doing was, Dad, can we go? Dad, can we go? Dad, can we go? And later on, he ended up transferring to another power station in Gorham, which brought us down a certain road where there were several race cars, including Bruce Elder's number 9, and the Tangway family had their V8 Bomber and the C-Class cars out there. So when Dad worked a Saturday afternoon, they'd get out of work at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and we'd be coming down River Road. All the cars would be out there ready to go. And it was just sheer terror from the last few miles to the house, me chewing on him, can we go, can we go? And it just took off from there and went ever since.
And that was common back then to have race cars at gas stations.
Gas stations, you know, the clusters of cars in people's communities, and we all had it. It's not that way anymore, but that's where it started.
Well, that's the truth.
There was a filling station, gas station on every corner.
That's right.
And my dad knew the Tangways because he worked with them down the paper mill. So, because he'd pull in and we'd get out, and I just couldn't drink it all in. And how I ended up with the V8 was, again, I was being a little brat, and Mr. Tangway took me out and opened the barn door, and there was the V8, first coupe I ever saw.
Yeah.
And it's in my garage today.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible right there.
That's how I got started.
Yeah.
So what year was that? That car in your garage, what's the span in time from that?
I saw that car in 1968. It was wrecked in 1972, sat out in the woods until 1998, sat in the woods for 27 years, just a hopeless wreck. And then we retrieved it and had it done in time for the 50th anniversary at Beech Ridge in August of '98. It's been in my garage ever since.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of that. We'll get to that at some point. You've done a lot of that.
So Paige, we'll turn over to you. You're obviously younger.
Yep.
Where did, so you're, huh? Hey, always be nice. I know you have family involvement in racing, but what specifically got you hooked on the sport?
Yeah, so I have just been involved in racing for more than half my life, I guess. So my grandmother, she won the first Powder Puff Derby at Wiscasset, actually, back in 1969. And I know my dad brought me to Wiscasset to watch the races when I was younger, and I started racing around when I was like 13. It was definitely before I had a license. I raced mini cups up in Kingfield, and one of my relatives bought Wiscasset Speedway, obviously, and they also owned the track up in Kingfield, Richard Jordan. And that's where I raced. I won the championship in 2013 up there. That was awesome. I loved that track because it was different. It was a tri-oval, and it had a road course in the middle of it, and it had a smaller like go-kart track in the front, and the mini cups ran the big track, and then like for special races we would run the road course.
That track was
Go ahead.
That
Yeah.
track was pretty popular for a while. I was in Florida, and of course Walter Newell
Yep.
was around there, and he used to report all the time.
Yeah.
And he used to say, "Oh, that place got packed at
Yeah,
times." didn't
yeah,
it?
it was really great car counts and spectators. They'd roll in, and it was fun. And we ran the road course during like special events, of course, but I stopped racing in 2015. It was shortly after my grandfather passed. Just really wasn't the same without him. So I stopped racing, but I still stayed involved in the sport. Even after I helped my friends with their race cars. I was part of Mike Orr's pit crew for a couple of years there. When he won the championship in 2014, Richard owned his pro stock, so that's kind of how I helped him out. So.
What was the thing that hooked you, though? Was it
so-
just the family connections?
Yeah,
or?
so Richard bought the track in Wiscasset, obviously, and I remember I was standing in the pit grandstands watching my dad mow the infield, and grass was knee-high, of course, and I looked around and I remember thinking, how many racetracks never opened back up like Wiscasset did after being shut down for a brief period of time? And that's where my research really jump-started, and I started Maine's Lost Speedway's Facebook page, and I really just created it to bring awareness of Maine's racing history that would otherwise maybe be lost. And yeah, so that's.
Well, we're all glad you did.
Yes. Yeah, Charlie, you're up next. What got you started in this racing business?
Grew up around cars my entire life. My father was a car salesman, so I grew up in a Ford dealership, basically. It was across the street from where I lived. So I would spend a lot of time there every day after school, practically. So I got to know a lot of the guys and all. And being that as it may, Bill Carlton, Wild Bill Carlton, he worked there with my father. So one night, even though we only lived about 3 or 4 miles from Speedway 95, and my father yelled out the window one day when we were just kids. This would have been 1968. 68 or 9, I can't remember exactly. And my father yelled out the windows, "You guys want to go to the stock car races?" And I'm like, sounds like a plan to me. Why wouldn't I? I guess. I've never been to the actual races. Mm-hmm. So, as it was back in the day, my friend and I, we piled on the back of a pickup truck, which we all rode in the back of pickups back in the day, and went to the racetrack, just right up the road. And I remember as we got closer, you could hear the cars in the background. You know, we were getting closer and closer. You could hear all the cars out practicing. And all I could remember was thinking, what the hell am I hearing? This is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, the closer we got, and then we pulled in the parking lot, and I bailed out of the truck before the truck even stopped moving. And I started running to the gate. My father was hollering and screaming at me and said, get back here, get back here. So once we paid, or he paid, it was a whole 75 cents to get in back then. I ran through the gate and ran up to the fence, the main walkway, and the cars were out tearing around the track, practicing. 56 Fords, 57 Chevys, all that stuff. And I remember the fence back then was all chicken wire.
Yeah.
And I remember clinging to that fence, and I'm sure my eyes were bugging right out. And honestly, I describe it to people, it's like I get hit by a bolt of lightning.
Yeah.
I just was, the sight, the sound, the smell,
Yeah.
it was just off the chart. It was just,
That
words
seems-
can't describe. It was just beyond belief.
Yeah.
And I was just hooked from then on. It was just
That
all
seems to be a
downhill.
common theme with the people sitting at this table.
Yeah.
For each show that we've done.
Yeah, it's funny how they always talk about the noise, the smell, the environment, but it's real.
It is,
It really
100%.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a life-changing event. And it doesn't strike everybody, I'm sure, but it strikes a lot of people. And when it's just something that fits. It's part of your DNA after that.
Yeah.
Well, all five of us really.
Yeah,
It's
it's
interesting
crazy.
connection that, with as we speak across the time, it was all, at one point our parents worked us into it.
Yeah.
And got us to the track, inadvertently, whether or not they weren't sure how much hooked we were going to be, or how much of a lifelong affliction it would become.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
Absolutely.
can, remember running through the gate once we paid at Beechridge. And one thing with Beechridge, because they had Class A's, Class B 6-cylinders, sounded like angry bees out there. And then you had C-Class. You could always hear the tires screeching. So when you were in line waiting for your ticket, you could always tell who was warming up by the sound of the cars.
Absolutely.
And then we run through the gate like Charlie, and I can remember Homer Drew and Dick Garrett coming down the front stretch, and my mother being terrified that something was going to happen to one of the cars.
Yeah.
Get in the catch fence, and they'd holler at me to get away. And I have memories of number 2 going right by me, and today it sits in my garage.
Yeah. Isn't that great?
My father used to, he went down there now and then. He'd always come back and talk about the Deuce and Dick Garrett. And talking about the 6-cylinders, we used to go down there every Sunday. They did a lot of Sunday races
That's
in
right.
the 70s. And those 302 Jimmy 6-cylinders, you could be in the top row with the bleachers and they'd rattle your eardrums. Boy, those things were
They had a
horrendous.
sound all their own.
Yeah. So we want to move on to involvement today. Steve?
Well, chasing backwards, just a whisker.
Okay.
A bunch of friends that we all went to the track in high school, and when we got out of high school, we got a limited sportsman car. Ran that on the dirt for a few years.
You did that?
Yep.
Okay, I remember you said you owned a car, but I thought that was later in the game and you went to Oxford.
No, we had a limited. Well, that's where we started out. And one time I had a dozen Chevelles up in Larry Tangway's gravel pit, and we were cutting 65 Chevelle Super Sports,
Oh, yeah.
bucket seats and consoles, throwing them out in the junk pile to cut them up and go to Beechridge.
guilty
And we
of that.
ran that for a few years, and then we had a late model for Oxford. And although we didn't do a lot, we finished 8th, 9th, and we were getting $150 a week.
Yeah.
So we bought a tire, some beer, put gas in the race car and the rant truck, and still had a few bucks left over. But we all eventually went our separate ways. I ended up working for a few years with Dave Kudamash on his modified at Beechridge when Larry Tangway was running. And that was really exciting. That was fun times. And when Larry got done, he had an eye injury, and that shortened his career. I was living in Freeport at the time, and I jumped over with Ricky Harrison. And Ricky had bought Corey Sanborn's late model from Oxford Plains and was putting that together. And a relative of Ricky's, Jerry, had a small lawn mowing business in Freeport, and went and mowed grass for a guy named Steve Griswold.
Oh, yeah.
And Steve come out, and Jerry said to him, "You ought to come to the races sometime and check us out." And Steve did. And that was the beginning of a long sponsorship.
He helped a lot of people.
With the Griswold family in racing and stuff. And Ricky's operation took off. They got 2 cars. They went on the Act Tour. They got a tractor trailer. It was just amazing.
So you spent some time in Victory Lane then?
They
had
did.
to.
They did. We got to look from the pit area, but you know, it was watching Larry go out. If the car was on, or Ricky with the late model, and he was also driving Stan Davis' six-pack car at the time, the former John Rosati modified.
Yeah.
And watch those guys go out, and if those cars were on, you were going to see something.
Yeah.
Because in 25 laps, they could come from the back to the front. And after seeing that stuff for years, it's like NASCAR, you ruined. Why watch that stuff?
Yeah.
You know, when we got to see the best that there was.
Yeah.
So I get done with Ricky Harrison, and I had always built car models, and I had a few from my childhood that I took with me to different places, and we lived in Freeport. I left the Brunswick Fire Department because I was burned out of being a paramedic. And I transferred to Portland, and I had about 30, 40 models. I left 2 boxes of them right there by the trash that day to pick up when we left Freeport. But I brought about a dozen other survivors home. A couple of years later, we were living in Gorham. Some friends, we went to a shop in Saco, Biddeford, Nan's Racing Collectibles, Mario Bennett and Nancy Marrow. And Mario has Champion Auto Sales next to Bentley's.
Yeah.
And she had a small racing collectibles shop. And while we were there, a friend mentioned to her that I had a couple of race car models, and she was putting on a little show the following week. So she came over and asked me about them. I says, why would anybody want to bother with those? And she says, oh, please, she says, bring them down. So I brought down a couple, including one of Gardner Levitt, and she had a show that weekend, and I was simply astounded by the interest. The people that flocked to these things. And I guess that turned a light on for me, and I started, because my son had been only born a couple of years earlier, and I'd be home taking care of him, so working on models seemed to fit the bill. And I ended up over the years making models of all the good A-class, B-class, C-class cars from the 60s, 70s at Beech Ridge, and all of the decent open comp cars from Maine open comp racing over the years. So I have about 300, and yeah, they're on the shelf now, and I take them to a lot of places. But that certainly got me going, and then pretty soon got the idea that, hey, I know where there's an old C-class car, and we knew where Bruce Elder's car was in the woods. We'd seen it as kids. And I went and asked Bruce, and he says, what do you want that for? And I says, I'm going to fix it up. I'd been to a show the previous winter at the Portland Expo, Mark Thomas's Racing Expo.
Right.
And there was a couple guys that were going to Skowhegan Fairgrounds on weekends, had a few cars, and they were hot rodding out there, and they brought a couple down to the expo. And I thought, geez, you know what, I can do that. We'll fix that number 9 up. And that's what we did. Got number 9, and that started the ball rolling for us with the big
Restorations.
cars.
I had always wanted to ask you what started you, other than desire. It had to take a moment. And you just
Well, I
explained
knew
it.
that car as a child. When my dad come back down the road from work, we'd see it out there in the afternoon waiting to get put on the trailer. And I knew the Tangways had the V8 right up the road, so my plan was to get number 9 and then go knock on the door for the Tangways to get that car. And I had an awful time getting that. But I did get that. Then we moved on. Dick McCabe brought me a 0 when he saw what happened with V8, and away it went.
How many have you done totally, do you think?
I did 7 on my own, and I helped out on 4 others.
Well, we're all glad
Wow.
you did. It's some nice stuff. I mean, you probably
Beautiful.
set the example for preserving cars.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a true statement.
Without a doubt.
I didn't realize you had so many models left, because I remember you were selling some at one time.
I did once in a while. I would,
Yeah.
and I've donated quite a few over the years to the Maine Vintage for the auction. You know, a lot of those have gone that route.
You still
these
got
are
300.
Amazingly realistic models too.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah,
unreal.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah. I did a list the other day. As I get older, you get forgetful, but I did put a list together, and I've given away like 142 over
Wow.
20 years.
Because he's giving away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
incredible.
so then, you know, with the race cars going, Maine Vintage sprang up in 2002. I got a chance to serve with Near on their Hall of Fame committee. I was fortunate to be involved with the Maine Motorsports Hall of Fame, and Charlie, you know, we did that for 20 years, and you know, a lot went on with racing history. So we
Ken
got
and
to
I
do
were
some
wondering
great
if you
things.
were a charter member of the Maine Vintage and
Yeah.
the Hall of Fame, though. You must have been.
Yeah, we was there that day for the Racing Expo when Bob Morris put it together. And that was basically because at that time there was about 15 to 20 people that had race cars and were bringing them to shows like Cumberland Fair or to the Racing Expo or something. He wanted to try and get a nucleus, you know, a focus group together.
Nice. Bob Morris is a good man for racing.
Yeah.
So now you've started what's going to hopefully a lifelong deal from here, Maine Lost Speedways. Just kind of, where do you get your information and harvest your other than probably Steve? And
Yep. I
like
dig
that,
for
right?
it. You know, I talk to a lot of drivers who are still around. There's not a lot of them now, but their families especially. I really set out and talk to them, and you know, newspaper articles. You know what. And I'll talk about that later, but I mean, those aren't always accurate either. But yeah, I mean, I just really talk to people, and he's been wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Where did the idea for the endeavor come from? Was it from the Dale Earnhardt series, or did you start yours right about then as well?
for Maine's Lost Speedway?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I started Maine Lost Speedways 12 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yep. I started that 12 years ago, and I posted on and off like throughout the years, and last couple years, definitely more recently, more often I'm posting just because my daughter's getting a bit older, so I'm able to do that with my time. But I really devote my time to Maine's racing history and finding out about it, going to historical societies, talking to these drivers, and as you and I were talking earlier, I go out to these racetracks and
I want to touch on that because
Sure.
a lot of people don't take that time. They just go to the internet and come up with
Yeah,
something. And you're like Sumner McCain. You're on the property.
Yeah.
So did you get the information for these tracks from Steve or checking the historical?
Yeah, checking historical societies and calling them, and of course Steve has provided me with a bunch of information as well.
So you reach out to the people that still own the
Yep,
property? Is that how you get on there?
Yep. I always ask permission.
Yeah.
And I recently went to Ellsworth, and as many of all of you know, that Ellsworth was a little hard to access for a few years there because of the owner wasn't too keen on having people out there on his property. He really didn't want people to know that a racetrack was out there. So it got handed over about 4 years ago, and the new owners are a little bit more welcoming. So I was able to get out there, and the new owners, it's wonderful because they were asking questions about the history of it, and I have my binder of each racetrack. So I brought my binder with me, and they were looking through it, the pictures and articles and racing ads, and
Yeah, nice.
educating people.
Well, that's important because I don't think when Sumner did the 100 years of racing in Maine, I don't think people realized how many racetracks, and you'd know a lot about this,
Yeah.
there actually were in Maine over the last
There
century.
there is a national Lost Speedways page, and I don't know if that's the Lost Speedways community.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the one that was
Dillner, if you've done that.
involved with Earnhardt
Yeah.
and stuff, but I give Paige credit because in 2020 they came up and did this episode on
Arundel.
Arundel, yes.
and it was because of they noted what they saw on her page that brought
Nice.
them up here. And we were able to get the number 9 I have down there because Bruce won his very first feature at Arundel in 1969. Paige called and asked if I knew about any cars. I said, yeah, I got number 9. And we brought that down. And it was almost 50 years to the year that they came down and did that episode, and Bruce was able to bring that car 50 years later to the track that he won his first race at.
That's incredible.
And at one point during the filming, they had a picture of Bruce with his original checkered flag taken in the same spot on the track where it was 50 years later.
Yeah, and I actually think that's one of the cool things that you do on your Facebook page. You stand there with a photo of the track
Yeah.
when it was
Yep. I
running
think that's
in
great.
the
Yeah.
exact same spot
So-
that
Yep.
that photo was taken.
So
currently.
kudos.
Yeah.
That makes it a reality when you
Page.
It
do
really
that.
does.
So I think we saw each other, all three of us here a few weeks ago. Were you you must have been instrumental, along with the Clarks, in doing the Exeter.
Yep, I helped
reunion.
organize that reunion. It was really wonderful because I think back in 2017 was the first one, and I unfortunately
Yeah, I
wasn't
went
able to go to that.
Yeah, I just came home.
Yeah,
a few years,
and the Clark brothers invited me out to explore Exeter because I've never been there, and I'm like, absolutely. So we went, and I think that really put a bug in the owner's ear, Jim Crane, to have another reunion because this is still, being talked about.
He enjoyed this one. I talked with him after more than the first one. And I went to a meeting with the Clarks and Dwight and
Yeah.
in the 4-car, Alan Gassick.
Alan, yep.
They think very highly of you. They're getting ready to race their dirt track bombers and the Fantasy
Yep.
Speedway modifieds this weekend at
Yep.
Unity, but they think very highly of you and they appreciated you doing all that.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah, it was
a deal.
wonderful. It just really, as Steve says, it's about the people and bringing people together, and it was wonderful sharing memories and stories.
You got to take the time to do it the way you people are talking on site.
Yeah.
Not just copy something off the internet. I mean, it's a real deal.
Yeah.
Truly.
So you've got 2 cars that've got some history.
Yeah.
One's like a Smokey Unique deal there that had a little cheating going on, and
Well,
Bob Halley car.
I have Bob Halley. Yeah, I have Bob Halley's '58 Ford. The cool thing about, once again, it kind of goes back to a lot of memories when I was a kid. I remember watching Bob race that car at Unity in '95 and win and
Oh, he
win and
dominated
win
the
and
place,
win
yes.
everywhere with that car. So many races, they're just ridiculous. But I was in, it was just, his car always stood out on the track, and his driving style, he was a great driver.
Very
Just
smooth.
very smooth,
Yeah,
super
very
smooth, aggressive when he needed to be. Nonetheless, I always liked the car. And I would see Bob occasionally down at the Augusta show every year. And I would ask him, I said, "You still have that 58 Ford down by your house?" "Oh yeah, I still have it behind my house." Yeah, can I come down and look at it? Sure, come on. So go down and look at it. I hounded him for probably 6 years. Just on, not hounded him, but on and off. "Geez, you want to sell that? You want to sell it?" No, I don't want to sell it, don't want to sell it. And I'm thinking, geez, it's just been sitting in the woods for 30 years. And I was like, what are you going to do with it?
He doesn't mind
Long
that. He's
story
got another
short-
one sitting there. too.
Yeah. Well, and long story short, after about 6 years, he said, "Why don't you come down and talk to me?" So we went down, my friend and I went down, and we talked to him, and I ended up getting the car from him.
Nice.
And he said, "What are you going to do with it?" And like Steve, I said, "Well, I want to restore it." Now, Steve had already done, this would have been 1999, so you'd already done
3-4 cars.
Did he
three,
give you
four cars.
he give you the incentive to want to do that?
After seeing his cars, absolutely, because he does fantastic work on everything he does. And like I said, yeah, it kind of kick-started me because I'd always kind of thought about it, but never really thought about it until I saw that Steve had been doing it, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is too cool. But I had a personal connection to it. Bob's a very likable guy, great guy, and he's easy to talk to and so forth. And so we hit it off, and it really wasn't a big problem to get it from him. Nonetheless, I got that one, and then I ended up getting a 56 Ford
Harvey Sprague.
Harvey Sprague's.
Both real cars, by the way. for
Both
people who
original
don't- yeah.
real cars. And Harvey's car I bought from a guy that had been sitting in a field in Blue Hill
Well, that's a common story.
for,
Sitting in
oh
the
yeah,
field,
very
isn't it?
typical. Probably been there for 35, 40 years. And contacted the owner, got the car from him, and I'm actually still working on the car. I need to finish it. It's quite close. The engine's in it, and
it's looking
it's
good.
getting close. But there again, I have a personal connection to it. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty certain that was one of the very first cars I ever saw on the racetrack at 95. The day I got struck by lightning standing at the fence, because that car was on the track at that particular time, and that's when Harvey was racing it.
Yeah,
Because
that's where he
Harvey
started.
and Sprague and I have talked about it many times. I've known him for a long time, and then I helped in the process of restoring the '58 Ford, the first one. I went to Dave Webster's shop, a friend of mine, right near where I live, and I sandblasted it and painted it and so forth. And he had been around racing. He had helped Bill Carlton since he was just a 10, 12-year-old kid.
I can remember him. He didn't even look old enough to be in the pits.
I'm sure he wasn't.
You know, my father and Bill Carlton were friends, so I used to.
Yeah.
I was going there when he was always there.
Absolutely. Well, after sandblasting the '58 and you know, he was helping me on it a little bit, and he goes, "Wow, this is pretty cool. I'd like to do one of these." And here's the funny thing is, he goes, I'd like to do Bill's coupe, Bill Carlton's old coupe, because that was when the first car that he ever started working on. And Bill ran that car for quite a few years.
He did.
And I said, "You're in luck. I know where that car is." And that was in Ellsworth. Wow. Just about.
That's an original car. we
Probably
bring to
a mile or
Summerfest.
so
Yeah, oh, it
from
is,
Ellsworth
yeah.
Speedway.
Oh.
It was up in the woods. The guy had it parked next to his garage and been sitting there for years.
Wow.
We went down and looked at it. Dave bought that. He did that car. And he had so much fun doing that. He said, "I'd like to do another one." I said, "What would you like?" He said, "I don't know." And I said, "I know what Harvey Sprague's Mustang is." Well, it just so happens he worked on Harvey Sprague's crew for years and years and years. He was Harvey's one of his main crew members when he ran, you know, NASCAR North and, you know, late model cars and pro stocks and so forth. So it was a perfect fit, because the cool thing is I have a personal connection to the two cars that I have, and Dave has a very direct personal connection with the two cars that he still has. So
Just Steve has a lot of connections with his. Those
Absolutely.
are great eras of racing. We were lucky. And speaking of great eras of
Yeah,
racing,
that's-
what do you think?
Well,
Best one?
I was going to say the history. Obviously, we have historians here. We need to dig into some of this history, and there seems to be an ebb and flow of the great eras in racing, and I'm sure it all comes down to personal connections. But
It reflects upon the fact that racing was going through developmental stages. So, you know, in the post-war years, you had the jalopies, the junkers, and at the time, this country was really focused on the midgets and what they call the big cars,
Big cars.
the sprint cars. But when
Yes.
people come home from the war and the guys wanted to start racing cars, because when you think of the stuff that they'd been through, it was natural that they get the same thrill from racing as they had surviving all the battles they'd been in. But not
interesting.
everybody could afford a midget or a big car. But the junker that was sitting out in the field with a little bit of work could go to the track. And once those things hit the tracks in droves, the midgets got jumped to the sideline. And, you know, that Memorial Day weekend when the Rundle opened, they had 3 days of racing. They had 2 days of stock cars and 1 day in the middle with midgets. And the midgets was a flop.
Yeah.
They never,
Wow.
they didn't have them back.
Yeah.
So, you know, my favorite era, to me, because we all relate to the eras probably differently, whether we have family connections or whatever. And for me, it was the 60s and the 70s and the early 80s, particularly at Beech Ridge and at Oxford Plains, where in the 70s, I got to see the curtain rise on open comp racing in Maine. And it's something, it was amazing, and you know, I'll never forget it. It was when you got there, it was $1,000 to win. It was big bucks from the Bears. It was heads up.
Are you talking about the Getty Open?
Get the Getty Opens, yep.
I got to tell you an interesting story there. Prior to that, Bob Knowles started running 100-lap opens on Sunday afternoons. All the Ridge guys would come up. A lot of great drivers from Beech Ridge.
Because the classes were nearly identical
That's
for a few
right.
years.
Right.
And laughingly, he always said his biggest mistake was he and the Bears were tight. Bob Bear was like a mentor to Bob Knowles. But he invited Dick up to watch one of those 100-lap opens, and about 3 weeks later, the Getty Open started. Kind of shut Bob down a little bit.
Yeah.
We all made out for it all the way around, though, for sure. Great racing. But I think your eras, obviously I was going to the track in the 50s with my father and watched a lot of it in the 60s. I didn't start until the 70s, but the 60s, the 70s, and part of the 80s, to me, were
well, in the
about as pure as
60s
it
and
could
early
get.
70s seemed to
Yeah.
be a golden era of
Oh, yeah.
automobiles in general.
It was
pure.
certainly the time of the backyard race car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was built, you built your car one way, you did yours, and you did yours, and they reflected the unique character or the ability of the car owners or the builders or their own ideas. And the speed shop wasn't always down the road.
Right.
So they built what they had by going into the junkyard out back. And, you know, looking at his car or my V8, it's a 40 Ford, it's a 40 Willys chassis, but it has a 56 Ford rear end, a 57 Chevy radiator, a 52 Chevy steering boxes, whatever they could cobble from the parts that they had to put together.
You got it one piece at a time.
No speed
Yeah.
shops.
You made it
Thinking
work.
that.
You made it
That
work
song
what you
came to
had.
mind.
Made it work.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
Yeah,
that was-
and you know, kind of stemming off of Steve here, like, you know, those are all like I would say like the late 50s, 60s, 70s are my favorite as well, even though I was not here. You know, talking with these drivers and their families, you know, what I really see as things that are similar is everyone was using their own hands to work on their own cars. They were doing it in their backyards, their garages. And, you know, at that time, you had racetracks that were popping up overnight. There was a ton of racetracks. And, you know, the track conditions, they weren't that great. I mean, like Cherry Field, awful. And, you know, despite the track conditions, you know, these drivers raced anyways with rocks being thrown at them, with dust, you know. They had a football helmet on and a handkerchief over their mouth and their face or in their nose. And, you know, they raced anyways. And I feel like it really made for fearless drivers. And I just love that
The
era.
drivers seemed larger than life as
Yeah.
well.
That's what I remember about my father, the
Yeah.
red bandana
Yep.
and the leather football helmet
Yep.
all the time.
And some goggles. Dave Davo told me Cherryfield was the dirtiest track he ever ran on.
Yep. Yep.
But I don't think, and I've said this 100 times, and I'm going to say it again. When I went and I was working at Banjos, you know, those people thought we raced about 3 weekends a year up here, and it snowed the rest of the year. But I can remember my father leaving the house on Thursday and maybe race the fairgrounds. And then the next night somewhere, I mean, he raced 3 or 4 nights a week for a while with all these tracks that were open because they weren't all open on the same night.
Right.
Smart enough not to do that,
Right.
but there was a lot of racing going on at one time.
There was.
A lot of racing.
Certainly.
What about for yourself, Charlie?
What was the question?
Your favorite era of racing?
Like Steve,
Same.
probably the same idea.
The golden
the
age.
60s, yeah, mid-late 60s, are probably right up into probably the early 90s. It kind of started going sideways after that. Even the late 80s, but certainly that era was about the time when money started rearing its ugly head. It really pushed out
things.
the guys
Really changed it.
that grew the sport to where it was,
Yeah.
and it really just
Well
kind of
said.
it kicked out the people that grew it to where it was at that point, and the money just came in,
Well, yeah, and I go
which
back
is
to
not
what-
a bad thing.
I go back to what Dale Chadbourne said at this table. That's about the time that the personal ingenuity started
gone.
leaving the
Yeah.
sport.
I can remember when a big something fancy was a Franklin hub.
Yeah.
Or a Franklin A-frame.
But
It wasn't like the whole
part of
chassis.
that too
Yeah.
can be laid out to the open comps in the 70s. Because when Bear had a show that had NASCAR points, you had guys like L.D. Ottinger, Butch Lindley,
Yeah,
Tiny
good
Lund
point.
chasing national points coming up here. These guys came up with the best that stock car products made. They had tube chassis,
Laughlin,
and the
yeah.
Oxford guys and the local guys would get looking at this. Hey, we want this. So the next year, the rules got tweaked a little more, then a little more, and pretty soon the stock chassis was gone. The tube rails were here, and the costs are through the roof.
And then the mindset kicks in. You can't race unless you have it.
Right.
Exactly
You
right.
know, so
I can remember it was a big deal to see somebody show up and they had a racing seat. Back
Yeah.
when they were fiberglass, they
Yeah.
weren't aluminum,
Yeah.
but a fiberglass racing seat was like, oh my God, look what this guy's got. This is, really? That's a big deal? Well, at the time it was because everyone used. I mean,
Right.
you can remember. I'm sure
yeah.
guys used a 30-gallon oil drum cut down with a pillow in it.
Davo and
So-
Rudy Karen would take a 15-gallon oil drum
Yeah.
and trim it into a seat.
Exactly.
Put some padding in it, and it's the first time I'd seen it or anybody's seen it.
And that
You'll
was-
remember this. They set the
Containment
seat
seat.
sideways
Exactly.
Right.
in the steering column, and when I can remember being a kid asking Dave
To
why
help
he
go
did
through
that.
the
Always
turn.
You
pointing
could
into
see
the
the
corner.
corner before he got to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of.
That's
kind
that
of
personal ingenuity. That's that
Yeah.
individual
That's-
ingenuity that I was talking about.
He was a cut above a lot when it came to ingenuity. People like him and Albert Robinson up on my end of town. I'm sure there were several down there. There was a lot going on.
Putting a body over another car to try to fill the.
When Dave went into the New England Hall of Fame, when I did his induction, Lou Boyd and Dick Berggren came over afterwards and said they had no idea how Dave did as much as he did with as little as he had. And I explained to them that a lot of times Dave's sponsor was the junk pile out back.
Yeah.
And he'd go out back and get the best of the worst bearings and rebuild the motor again.
That era, and I tell this to people, today's era, if they can't have everything, they don't think they can compete. That era could have mismatched heads, could be having a problem during the race, and those people still thought they could win the race as long as it wasn't over. They didn't understand.
Right.
the other side of it.
Exactly.
It was like, we still got a chance, we can still win this
Yeah,
thing.
we're still running.
Darlow's a perfect example of that.
It is,
Yeah.
and he had a trailer with a low bottom
Yeah.
in the middle, and it wasn't uncommon for Dave to race at Wiscasset and then be laying underneath the car on the trailer headed to Beechridge, working on the car on the way
Yeah.
While they were driving.
On the
while
road.
they were driving,
Yeah.
and thought nothing of it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
This
just
is
amazing.
this is the mentality
Yeah.
that you saw back then, which they didn't think anything of it.
Absolutely
In today's
not.
world, people would say this
When's
person's
my-
out of his
Like I,
mind.
Yeah.
like I said, people
But-
don't think they can do it if they don't have it all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That attitude wasn't
Like,
around.
I can't
at
do
all.
anything
The
until I get
mindset
my car
today
back
is-
from the
is
shop.
just take it to the shop.
Right.
That's
Right.
You know,
Yep.
and
That's-
we'll pick
Get
it
it
up
back next week.
Saturday morning.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean there's not some good drivers around.
That's
the
correct.
country.
Right,
absolutely
exactly.
I want
not.
to be sure and say that
No,
because there's some
God,
great
no.
drivers around.
Absolutely.
But the mentality is just
Yep.
is just different.
It's totally different. Not
Yep.
not that it's a bad thing.
Just different.
But it's just the world.
The
we're in.
day of the people like Dave Darvo who could build a car and then set it up and drive it. Same way with Russ Nutting. People
Russ
like
is
that.
great. Yes.
Those guys are gone.
I
Going
know
away.
the best car I ever had in the '70s. I had $1,200 into it, and it had a hell of a motor in it. It had nice hubs on it and stuff. Of course, you couldn't even buy the hubs in pieces right now for that and the brakes. You know. Favorite driver?
Yep. I got a couple.
I'm going to leave.
I was going to
I'm going to leave.
Pete Silver.
He's looking for Pete's name on his
I'm going to go to the
list.
bar.
And you know, I've said, pick me. I've said this before, and thinking about that on the way up here. And you know, we'd hear about Junior Johnson down south and how he got started with very little, and sometimes not the best of circumstances. But and they took and made a movie out of that. But if they ever made a movie up here, this guy would be the perfect example. Because he took just a notion and a dream and went down south with whatever he had to go race, you know, slept in a loft or in a shop, did what he had to do to pursue an idea that he had. And, you know, that's laying it all on the line.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would have done that if they didn't have families and kids back then.
Yeah.
But you were fortunate.
Oh, I was lucky.
Yeah. But
A lot of good things happened by accident because of an accident.
yeah.
Yeah.
It got me there. I didn't expect that, by the way.
But if they ever was to do something, this would be a start right there. But I wanted to mention a couple of guys, Homer Drew and Dick Walston. And there's a great picture here. It's Homer stepping out of P38 with a cast on his foot, 1974. And behind him is the number 22 CV Camaro that 2 weeks later he would drive in the Oxford 200, qualified well, and still with a cast on his foot, which he broke his ankle playing softball. And that night he got caught up in someone's wreck, not of his own making. They hauled the 22 in, parked it. The car went down several laps while they worked trying to figure out what's going on. Finally, put 2 new front tires on it. Homer went back out, and George Summers from Massachusetts was leading at the time.
Another great driver.
And Homer went blasting by him. George's crew called him on the radio, said, "We've got a watch on Homer." He says he's the fastest guy out there. Stay with him. George radioed back and said, "I can't keep up with him, but I'll keep him in sight." And all with a cast on his foot.
I call it Homer's reign of terror because I really do, because when he got that role you're talking about, when that started,
Yeah.
nothing else was going to happen
Yeah.
but Homer. I mean, I don't care if it was at Unity, Breach Ridge, Oxford, Speedway 95. It just was complete domination. I mean, we've all been fortunate, I think, to have great moments, but that moment there will last forever in this state.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah. Another one, when Homer had his induction into the New England Hall of Fame, first Maine driver to go into Near's Hall of Fame, Bruce Elder picked up Bob Bushley, who wasn't well, and he rode down the back seat with us, and I kicked myself for not having a tape recorder, but Bob spoke about Homer driving and told me of an episode. It was the end of the 1970 season. And Bob him and Clyde Booth had a speed shop, B&C Speed in Wyndham. And it was on the roof of their P38. And of course, when the season was over, Bob sold a lot of parts to all the competitors. So Oxford always ran a big race a week or two later than Beach Ridge. So a week goes by after the Ridge closes, and Bushley gets a call. That's Bob Bear. He says, Bob, and he says, I'd like you to bring P38 up to, we're going to have a 100-lap open next week. I'd like you to bring P38. Bushley says, I can't. Bear says, what do you mean? He says, I've sold all the parts to it. And he says, that's how I make my living. So Bear says, what would it take? And he says, well, I'd have to get it, do this, do that. He says, you put that car together, put it on my dime. He says, I want it up here. Following Sunday, Homer went up. And Bushley's got the P38 there. It's a 100-lap open. So what Bear did, he had a 100-lap open for his Oxford cars, and 100-lap open for open-wheel cars. So he had modifieds and supers and things come up. So Homer shows up with his helmet about 10:30, and the gauges are taped over. And he says to Bob, he says, how come the gauges are taped over? Bushley says, don't worry about it. He says, what's that motor? Bushley says, none of your business. He says, just drive it. and he did. Led all 100 laps with a car that raced on dirt and won the event.
Wow.
Yeah, you have another
Simply amazing.
Yeah, they were both amazing. I was
Yeah.
fortunate enough to meet Bushley in the 80s. He used
Yeah.
to stop when we had the Bush North car with Prescott Racing.
Yeah.
I guess he had family in Fairfield, Maine.
Yeah.
And it didn't take too long talking to him that you realized what he was inside and mentally.
Exactly.
And that picture became a lot
But-
clearer. Not a braggart,
Yeah.
no big stories.
Kudos
just-
to Bob Bear because he was an entertainer and he knew a showman when he saw one.
Yeah.
And, he paid Bushley to get that car up there.
One of the other cars you restored had quite an event at Oxford, the 6 car of Walston-Hume. That's a story that's worth telling.
The 6 car, October 19th, 1969, the year before, they having the Maine State Championship for Oxford cars. And at the time, 57 Chevys, 56 Fords, Pontiacs, full like the cars that Unity went to in '66. So Dick Walston goes up with this number 6 coupe and wants to run. So he goes to see Bear and says, I want to run my car. Bear says no. And well, Walston persisted and went on. So finally Bear had enough. He says, okay, look. Dick McCabe came up as well with his 0. He says, you guys can run. He says, you got to take your racing tires off the back. You got to put street tires on. And you have to start last on every restart. Walston said,
Great deal.
deal. So the race started, and Dick followed Stan Horn, moved up to 3rd. They pitted around lap 50 for fuel, went back to the back, started working their way up through. On lap 71, Dick spun out a 3rd time, back to the end of the line, and worked his way back up. And there's another picture of the car. But anyway, caught the leader, Bob Mayo, with 2 laps remaining, passed him to win the $1,000 prize.
On street tires.
On street tires. And
3 times from the back.
went up 3 times from the back that day. And he earned himself
Wow.
the front page of the Lewiston paper the next day, but there it is there.
Wow.
It was on the front page
How cool
of
is that?
the Lewiston headlines. And Bear gave him $1,000, but said, don't ever bring that car back. So, and just one more quick one. Just before that number 6, Dick had built another number 6. And this one had fenders with the hot rod look. And he spared, Dick did all his own stuff, but he spared no expense on this one. And he got out to the track that night with that car on the hull, a brand new car. This is mid-season 1968. Pulls in to his parking spot and is immediately approached by a couple of people Frank Howes and Dick Allen, and they had a 57 Plymouth bomber car that they ran, and they had no driver that night. These guys were wizards at making the most ungodly pieces of crap go, and Dick knew it. So Dick says, I'm going to drive your car tonight. And he went and got his dear friend, Donnie Peterson, Pete Peterson's brother, to get into number 6. So come time for the lineup, they said to Dickie that this car doesn't have any points. Do you want to start up front? Dick says, nope, hell no. He says, I want to be out back. I want to see what the car's got. So Donnie had been driving a bomber car, and he ended up in Dick's new number 6, starting at about 10th place. So Dick come up through the field like a hot knife in butter. And with about 10 laps to go, there was just one car in front of Dick, and it was his new number 6 with Donnie Peterson. So Dick tried his best. He slammed Donnie several times, tried to pass him on the outside. Donnie wouldn't have any of it. And Don won the race. Dick came in second, got beat by his own equipment. And I have, there's a picture from that night.
Wow.
With them together on the trailer. Awesome. And it was the only race that car ever won. Dick sold it to a high roller a few weeks later who destroyed it at Beechridge. Mm-hmm. And Donnie was killed 3 months later coming back from the banquet at Beechridge.
Pete just passed away a couple months ago.
And Pete just passed away a few weeks ago. But those are my stories.
Wow.
Those are the
great
guys.
stories.
That is awesome.
Excellent.
You know, the color, the character. When you say your favorite era, you know, these guys are larger than life.
Yeah.
I met Dick in the 70s, and Dick and Phyllis both. I'll always treasure that friendship. Dick was a big figure, bigger than life. I didn't realize how big until I told you this story the other day at a Rundle. It had been closed for a while, and they had one of those days where you had to run a race to be grandfathered in. I'd never been there, and I was fortunate enough to beat Dick and I think Jeff Stevens.
Yep.
And I went to get paid because it was back in the 70s where we all looked like we just come back from a Duck Dynasty filming, and they wouldn't let me to the pay booth. They blocked it. They weren't going to pay me. Walsingham came around the corner, and once they realized I was friends with Dick, it was like the Red Sea part. I'm not exaggerating either. You already know how he was when it came to that stuff. But
Any favorite drivers for you that
You
come
know,
to
it's
mind?
really hard because I was born way too late. But, you know, based on reading, you know, you really nailed it, Steve. And also Lou St. Terre, he was really respected on and off the racetrack is another big one.
I hear a lot about him, and he's probably a candidate for the Maine Hall of Fame.
Yeah, for
you know?
sure. And, you know, he won a lot of championships between Cherryfield and Ellsworth.
Yes.
And he was wonderful.
Yeah, he kicked some butt at Cherryfield.
Yeah, he did.
Seriously.
Yep.
Yeah.
Tough
Yeah,
competitor.
Andy talks about him, but Andy, he doesn't try to push
Right, I
anything,
know.
or he keeps it really low key.
Yeah.
But he was really good.
Yeah, he
How
was.
about for you?
Favorite drivers? You know, I have, kind of like what Steve said, I have so many favorites. It's almost, for me, it's impossible to pick a favorite driver. I have my own, you know, when you're younger,
Mount
but I've
Rushmore.
seen so many,
Yeah.
I've seen so many great drivers do some just absolutely amazing things and entertain us over the years that I can say that's one of my favorites. Well, then I see something else amazing happens on the racetrack, and I'm like, oh my, you know, it just goes on and on. I mean, I've always been a Ralph Nason fan, always been a big fan of Mike Rowe, been a fan of this guy here.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go Homer Drew. Talk about Homer Drew. First time I ever saw Homer Drew was at Speedway 95, open 100-lap race that he was running the CV Studebaker.
Yep.
And that was 72. Yeah.
72.
And I can, excuse me, I was a fan instantly. And I think everybody in the place was packed. And it was just unbelievable how he drove that car.
Yeah.
And it was just, and I think he ended up not finishing.
Probably.
I think something might have broke, but he just,
It was so
Threaded
unusual to
through
see a
people.
Studebaker.
He just was in a league of his own.
just unbelievable.
When
Yeah.
when Jerry Seavey, another fellow I met early on, who was a wonderful person. When that Camaro showed up with those big steamroller
Yeah.
Firestones that Seavey was selling, you know, the race wasn't for first anymore, was it? I know people say that about people, but during Homer's reign of terror, that was just a fact. When that showed up, it was over. I don't care where you were. Didn't have to go to Beach Ridge, his home track. You could go to anywhere in the state, and that's just what was going to happen.
Yeah, he was the guy you had to beat.
Yeah, and things are set up like that. Like you said, they leave on a Thursday and they
Oh,
hit
yeah.
3 or 4 different tracks in a
And
weekend.
that team had Chummy. That team had some great people.
Good one, Hannah.
And it had knowledge, and it had financing. I mean, hell, cream of the crop.
Yeah.
They raised the bar, really.
As always, the clock is
know.
running here, and we haven't seen the finish line yet, but we're gonna go up against it. But being again historians, you've seen, researched, and lived the golden era of racing, and let's fast forward to today. Things obviously have changed. Tracks are closed. The sport involves a lot more money than personal ingenuity and willpower. What's your thoughts on the current state of racing? And Paige, by the way, you're involved in a documentary that's being filmed right now that I told you I feel is a cautionary tale that people can see to what direction racing is unfortunately
It's a
heading
hard
in.
topic, I mean, to talk about. And I kind of joke with the filming guys. I'm like, I feel like I'm going to get my butt kicked after, because I feel, with us historians, we know where racing's heading. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't hold the same place in society as it did even back in the 90s, I would say. And it's on life support. And, people have other entertainment options nowadays. People can go to the Sea Dogs or go to a movie, just all things that really didn't, cell phones, that's
Or
another
just
huge one,
on
I
their
should
screen.
say, and computers, video games, whatever, and they're not heading to the racetrack, and it's really sad. It's, the fan base is dwindling and car counts are as well.
So what good way to say it? I think tracks start having a problem, then these other things are available.
Right.
And
Yep.
once they leave, it isn't like, well, we're going to go do this and we're going to
Right.
go do this for a couple of weeks and come back.
Yeah.
They just don't come back.
Well, and I also personally, I think that the days of the shade tree mechanic are over. Obviously, you need to have a degree in computer science to work on a car these days. You can't just strap a motor to a
Right.
tree and change it
Right.
in your
Yeah.
backyard or whatever. So the connection to the automobile is kind of disappearing too. So Steve, I know you started mentioning something.
No, I have not been involved in active racing for some time. So, my take on it is not, I can't sit there and say, well, this track that much. But obviously we all know about Beach Ridge going, to the wayside. And that certainly had a huge effect, and it still is, on Maine Vintage. A lot of people originally from Maine Vintage were involved with Beach Ridge. And that's going to be a challenge for the club to overcome.
Yep.
Is, what's going to happen? How do you keep the connection with those people? Wiscasset was, in its unique situation, for as dormant or as many changes as that track went through, it's a tale of survival. It came back.
Yeah, the
Most
racing-
of the time they don't.
They were lucky in the ownership. Very
Very.
lucky.
And
Yes.
and the people, in spite of the telephones and all the internet, you got the fan base back
Yeah.
after being dormant for a while. But, we've talked about Oxford. I think the clock is ticking, and, what's going to happen with Del Merritt after 95?
Right.
I don't know.
There's a lot of ifs and ands, buts, and
Right in the
ors.
middle of a large commercial area.
Oh, it's a
You
fantastic
got to look
location.
at the landscape. Yeah.
But the place needs a lot of love. It needs management, needs money, needs all kinds
And the
of things
people
to really bring it.
moving into the areas of the tracks are different. It used to be
Yeah.
the drawn to the track and the roar of the engines. Now it's
Now they're complaining about it.
My
No.
silence and my suburban paradise
They
is
drive
being
home, they
disrupted.
order DoorDash, they
Yeah.
stream TV. They don't care about the Scarborough Downs or the Beach Ridge Speedways. I understand it. I get it. It's a generational change.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's something we're going
Yep.
through.
Yep.
That's
the way
why
it
the
is.
three of you are so important.
Yes.
We're lucky as a racing community that you make this. What you guys are doing is a commitment. It's like another job. So what we owe you guys a debt of gratitude.
But the challenges aren't just there on the track. The challenges are there too for the history groups,
Yeah.
for the history people. okay? Groups like Mid-State, New York Antique Club, groups are suffering from people. There aren't enough boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Okay? How do you keep the interest going? When the people that saw the stuff were there for the memories, when those people move on, what's the connection then? Is it just for what Paige does on the internet? How do you keep that connection strong? Look at the NASCAR fans that just 1 week they pack Charlotte, then the next they don't care.
No.
How do you do that? How do we do
Yeah.
that?
Right.
Well, you just took an hour to answer some of that question because this is forever. But you are right. I mean, it's going to take the people seeing it and being reminded of it to have an interest in it.
Right.
I
as it
think it's pretty
disappears.
amazing that Paige, at your age,
Yeah,
that
good
you
point.
have the interest and you've
Right.
had it for this long, 12,
12
13
years,
years,
yeah.
and you dig deep.
And
like
I've
you said,
cautioned
you're
her
on the
not
ground.
to burn out.
Right.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
a
Yeah.
lot there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what happens at some point to the cars,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
to the helmets,
Yeah.
to the trophies?
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Where does all that stuff go from those
And
people?
you know, I've talked with Steve before. You know, it's really I mean, I wish younger folks my age were into this history thing to keep it alive. You know, but you know, people my age, you know, they're not interested. A lot of them, I can't speak for everybody, but they're not interested. They don't know what's on top of their parents' attic with pictures, and it goes to the wayside. It gets thrown out. They don't know what it
That's
is, and
true.
you know, how do we save that?
I
you
have
know?
seen though, which is kind of interesting, I do appreciate this too, is that when some young people, not all, but when they're exposed to old photos and stuff, or stuff that's explained to them, or they have to get to go into the pit area and see how things are done, that a lot of times does fire people up.
Yeah,
Kids,
yeah.
even a lot of young people, when
Absolutely.
they're exposed directly to it and see it, it's amazing how some of them are really drawn to it. It's just
We're lucky
it's
as
a number thing.
We're all lucky as a group because we had a family connection that got us there. Not everybody has that.
Right,
You know, that started us and it stayed.
Yeah,
It's just
right.
stayed forever.
Yep.
I know we've overshot the runway here, but Steve, I know you wanted to give a plug on an event we have coming up in the end of July.
Just July 28th at Beach Ridge. They're opening the track one more time for a car show. It's going to be a still show. And the Maine Mobile Museum will be there. There'll be a lot of history. It's a chance for people to come to the track, say their goodbyes, and you know get some closure. And it should be a great day. If the weather's nice, we're going to probably have an overflow crowd.
You'll have cars and models there, both.
Yes.
won't you?
Champions.
Yeah. Nice.
Yep.
Champions,
Yep.
yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That'll be a big deal.
Can't
Yeah.
wait.
That'll be a really big
You know, it's
deal.
a place where there was a lot of legends made,
Oh,
Yeah.
incredible.
Unbelievable.
a lot of
Incredible.
heroes
Yeah. Yes.
made there.
Yeah, big time.
And heroes are a good thing. We need heroes, don't we?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's part of that's kind of part of the deal now, is that there is no heroes. There's
So-
just names.
Right,
It's not
names.
the
So-
hero
Yep.
status that the older guys
Donations,
had.
donations are to Maine Vintage, and I
Yes.
can't stress that enough.
It's a-
fundraiser for
Yes.
the club,
It's a free event to attend, but donations are accepted, and they all go to the Maine Vintage
and it
Race Car
costs money to
Association.
get that trailer on the road and to do the Maine Motorsports Hall of Fame.
I think we might have to do a episode 2.
Oh, I know.
Well, we haven't even scratched the surface.
No.
on some
No,
of
we
this
have
stuff.
not.
We haven't even scratched the
No,
surface.
no.
Thank you all.
Yeah, we'll
No,
definitely have
thank
to get
you.
guys back
Thank
together.
you guys
you.
very much.
If you want to find out more about what's happening with the Maine Vintage Race Car Association, you want to see past episodes of the Roundtable, find out what we're about. Our mission is to preserve and present the history that these guys dig into and help us gather up. And it's our mission to preserve and present that history of motorsports in the state of Maine. Not just oval track racing, drag racing, motocross, snowmobiles. It's motorsports, and we appreciate your support through your membership, through your support of shows like this, and we appreciate Larry and the crew again from the Lincoln County TV for hosting us here once again. So on behalf of my co-host Pete Silva, our guests Steve Pellerin, Paige Woods, and Charlie Sheehan, thank you guys all for joining us today.
Thank
we
you.
really
Thanks for having
appreciate
us.
it.
Thank you so much.
And look for us at mainvintagerace.org. That's where you can find out all the information about how you can help us preserve our mission. So we'll see you next time. Thank you.